That's wrong. The president does want the investigation into his White House to end, but tonight Robert Mueller continues his work. Plus, the attempted takedown of Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein at the hands of Jim Jordan, a fact check for Trey Gowdy, and a Republican Party buoyed by a Supreme Court pick. And protests across the land on immigration as Melania Trump makes another appearance at the southern border. All of it as the 11th hour gets underway on a Thursday night. Well, good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. Day 525 of this Trump administration, which now finds itself facing twin battles that will likely define the Trump presidency for years to come. For starters, there is that opening on the Supreme Court, which the president made sure to bring up again today.
We're going to pick ourselves one great United States Supreme Court justice. We're going to start working on that process. We've already started. And hopefully we're going to make you very proud.
And tonight there was confirmation that a formidable White House lobbying effort aimed at potentially wobbly Republican senators is already up and running before there is even a nominee that we know of. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders wrote tonight that the president met with Senators Grassley, Collins, Murkowski, Manchin, Donnelly, and Heitkamp to discuss the Supreme Court vacancy. The POTUS team also talked with more than a dozen other senators today as part of ongoing outreach to get views and advice from both sides of the aisle. The other battle this president is fighting and the other front we are covering tonight would be, of course, the Mueller investigation. And this one line from the president's Twitter feed this morning may say it all. This is the American president pointing out, quote, Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with meddling in our election. Again, that's the Russian argument, long ago disproven by our U.S. intelligence community. The president also attacked the special counsel by name today, quote, when is Bob Mueller going to list his conflicts of interest? Why has it taken so long? Will they be listed at the top of his $22 million report? What about the 13 angry Democrats? Will they list their conflicts with crooked Hillary? And what is going on in the FBI and DOJ with crooked Hillary? The DNC and all of the lies, a disgraceful situation. The president's comments were a curtain raiser, really, for today's hearing, where his team, the Republicans in the House, went after the president's own appointees, the FBI director and most especially Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein.
It's really the Rosenstein investigation. You appointed Mueller. You're supervising Mueller. It seems like you should be recused from this more so than Jeff Sessions.
Congressman, I can assure you that if it were appropriate for me to recuse, I'd be more than happy to do so.
And I want to know why you won't give us what we've asked for.
Sir, I certainly hope that your colleagues are not under that impression. That is not accurate, sir. And
it is accurate. We have caught you hiding information.
If you have evidence that this president acted inappropriately, present it to the American people. Whatever you got, finish it the hell up.
Said the man who spent nearly 2.5 years and over $7 million investigating Hillary Clinton and Benghazi and found no evidence of wrongdoing. That was followed by more questions to Rosenstein about the length of the investigation.
Is the special counsel's investigation taking too long? Has he deliberately slowed his pace?
Sir, I can assure you that Director Mueller is moving as expeditiously as possible.
Mr. Wright, are you one of those 13 angry Democrats that my Republican colleagues keep referring to?
I do not consider myself an angry Democrat.
Mr. Rosenstein, are you a Democrat?
I'm not a Democrat and I'm not angry.
There are reports the special counsel is opening up new angles of inquiry in the Russia investigation. Tonight, the Washington Post says Mueller's team is looking at ties between Brexit supporters linked to Russian officials and the Trump campaign. There are also reports that Mueller has subpoenaed another former aide to longtime Trump advisor Roger Stone. That aide, Andrew Miller, reported to have worked briefly for Mr. Stone around the GOP convention 2016. We heard from another longtime Trump associate today, Michael Cohen, sending this message, quote, my family and I are owed an apology after 2 years, 15 hours of testimony before House and Senate under oath and producing more than 1,000 documents. Dossier misreports 15 allegations about me. My entire statement must be quoted. I had nothing to do with Russian collusion or meddling. It's unknown what may have prompted that. Emily Jane Fox of Vanity Fair reports tonight that as Cohen debates whether to cooperate with the feds, one person she spoke to wished to get a message out to Cohen. That person said, quote, "Please let him know that he could go down in history as the man that saved his country. I think his family would be so proud of him." On that note, let's bring in our leadoff panel on a Thursday evening. Kimberly Atkins, chief Washington reporter for the Boston Herald. Jonathan Lemire, White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Cynthia Oxney, a former federal prosecutor, veteran of the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. Cynthia, I'd like to begin with you, if that's okay, and that is this. The center left, and the left woke up this morning after the fog of the news about Justice Kennedy leaving the court with the realization that this president will be selecting a judge, a man or a woman, who will be seated on the court, presumably in time, to potentially adjudicate the president of the United States. What's your thinking about that?
Well, I think their first thought was this would probably be somebody who would help overturn Roe v. Wade, and that somewhere between 15 and 18 states abortion would be illegal within the next year. So that was the first thought. The second thought is, of course, one more tragedy for what's happening to our justice system, and it doesn't appear to me that there's really a way to stop it. The president is meeting with these senators to shore that up. I mean, all we can do, I think, at this point is hope and pray that some of the women, the female Republican senators come through and stick with their strong feeling that Roe v. Wade is the law of the land and should be upheld. But really, it's kind of a hopeless time.
Kim Atkins, on that note, the president wakes up in Wisconsin and starts on social media talking about Robert Mueller. What do you think that's about?
I mean, it's about what he has been railing against for months now, this investigation, no matter what other wins he may have, and the ability to appoint another Supreme Court justice and really galvanize the entire Republican Party around him. I can't think of a bigger political win for him this week, but he is still so focused on this investigation, which leads people to wonder, and some Democrats have been wondering aloud, if there would be a conflict in him appointing a Supreme Court justice who would ultimately may be asked to decide whether the president, if Robert Mueller subpoenas him or tries to compel his testimony and he refuses, that would go to the Supreme Court. Can a president be indicted? That's a question that would go to the Supreme Court. If the president fires Robert Mueller, what, if any, recourse Congress or other investigators would have? That's also a question that's open legally. So for the president to be in the position to appoint the person who is ultimately deciding that, you have senators like Cory Booker openly saying that that would be inappropriate in a way to push back on that. We also know that the president has reportedly at times been grumbled that Neil Gorsuch, Justice Neil Gorsuch, hasn't been as loyal to him as he wanted. So the question is arising, will the president put a loyalty test to the Supreme Court nominee that he puts forward? It really ties together the Supreme Court pick and this Mueller investigation in a really unique way.
Jonathan Lemire, our colleagues over at the New York Times tonight are out with a clean kill. Maggie Haberman, Adam Liptak, I will quote from it tonight. President Trump singled out Justice Kennedy for praise. Even while attacking other members of the Supreme Court, the White House nominated people close to him to important judicial posts. Members of the Trump family forged personal connections. Their goal was to assure Justice Anthony M. Kennedy that his judicial legacy would be in good hands should he step down at the end of the court's term that ended this week, as he was rumored to be considering. Allies of the White House were more blunt, warning the 81-year-old justice that time was of the essence. There was no telling, they said, what would happen if Democrats gained control of the Senate after the November elections and had the power to block the president's choice as his successor. I know you are of the mind that things Supreme Court justice related are areas where this White House has performed.
That's right. This is the second time for a White House that's been gripped with such dysfunction. More often than not, they effectively vetted and rolled out the pick of Judge Gorsuch last year, and of course he was confirmed and took his seat on the bench. And now this. And the Kennedy's departure is actually sort of a two-part strategy that led us to this moment. One that predates Trump. Let's remember, of course, that Mitch McConnell would not hold hearings for Merrick Garland, President Obama's choice, in 2016, saying that this wouldn't be right for a lame duck president to nominate someone to the bench. The Republicans for a while now have really prioritized Supreme Court seats, saying that was their strategy. Even as they saw sort of long-term demographic trends in this country going against them, the country becoming more urban and perhaps less white, they thought that a bulwark could exist in the Supreme Court. And they moved forward in this way. And Donald Trump, as a candidate, smartly released these names of potential justices, which allowed Republicans, some who were very lukewarm on him, to say, well, I may not like everything about Donald Trump, but if I vote for him, I can get a justice that will uphold my values. And then we're seeing in a lot of this reporting how the Trump White House, including Ivanka Trump, the president himself, others around him, sort of sealed the deal with Justice Kennedy and made him feel comfortable, willing to step aside, thinking that someone that would share his ideological values, his views on the law, would take his place.
It's Lyndon Johnson-esque, I'll say that. Cynthia, I have a list here of some of what's been in the air and water this week. An aide to Roger Stone gets caught up. Trump wakes up talking about Mueller on social media this morning. The Brexit architects are now in for scrutiny. And what's missing from the public domain this week? We haven't heard from Rudolph Giuliani in a long time. What do you think is going on?
Well, I, for one, have not missed him. I can say that. I think what's going on is they're sort of holding their breath, waiting to see what Cohen's going to do. You know, there's a lot of pressure on Cohen. They have enough to indict him. He's had this switch of lawyers. He had sort of this weird tweet today that sort of indicated he was trying to tell people, no, really, I'm not gonna flip. But the pressure's on him, and I think there's some time. They're sitting back and sort of waiting on that. That's one thing. And then they're busy attacking poor Rod Rosenstein with both barrels in an attempt to, create some kind of fake controversy about him, maybe get him censured by the House so that Trump can use that as an excuse to fire him.
It was unbelievable viewing today. Hey, Kim, adding to the chaos theory of this White House you cover, the report out today that the president is floating names to replace his chief of staff.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you believe it when we see it. We have seen that for a long time. We've seen other members of the White House who have been reportedly on the outs for 6 or 8 months. But it is no surprise that the president and Chief of Staff John Kelly have not seen eye to eye for quite some time. And he is looking for people to replace him. I think it's just the next extension of President Trump feeling as if he is emboldened. He is emboldened by what he sees as a series of political wins that he sees himself as the mastermind of, and he doesn't need this big staff of people. He has been essentially serving as his own chief of staff for some time now, serving as his own communications director, and he thinks he knows what he's doing, and I think this is a continuation of that. This is really his strategy as he moves forward into the midterms and beyond.
Jonathan, let's go back to the last thing you said. Considering that the court unites even the never-Trumpers in the Republican Party, it's one thing everyone agrees on. Considering that they're playing offense, you think this is a week of good times and good feelings in the Trump West Wing? It should be, yes. The president got a number of victories this week. Obviously, Kennedy's departure is first and foremost. But prior to that, the court made a couple rulings that were very favorable to him. Yeah. Obviously, it upheld his travel ban, which the president is taking as a big sign, not just as a validation of executive powers, but rather a validation of his strategy on immigration, the sort of hawkish approach to the border. Labor unions. That's the other one, where studies have shown that in states where right-to-work states like this, which now could apply nationally, when union members are not
compelled to pay dues, it's a 3.5% drop in Democratic turnout in presidential elections. That's obviously another win for Republicans. The president got his summit with Vladimir Putin that he has so wanted. That was announced this morning, and that will happen in a couple weeks in July. And that's why it's so striking that his rage this morning on these tweets about the Mueller investigation still come. There's something still going on there that is bothering him despite a string of victories.
And Cynthia, just for a last word, the role Michael Cohen can yet play in this case.
Well, on some level, we think he can play a huge role, and on some level, we really don't know. I mean, it could just be that they have the evidence to indict him on taxi frauds and things of that matter. I mean, of that ilk, or because he knows so much about the president's business, he could be somebody who could really be the linchpin to making decisions about, indictment decisions about the president. So we really have to wait for Mueller, and that's very hard. But that's where we are in this investigation, waiting for Mueller. It's like waiting for Godot, but it's waiting for Mueller.
Our thanks to all three, and a literary reference, no less, to go out on. Kimberly Atkins, Jonathan Lemire, Cynthia Oxney. Really appreciate it. You're helping us out on a Thursday night. And coming up, more of the fireworks between House Republicans and the administration's own men at Justice and the FBI. And later, hundreds of people hauled out of an office building where our senators work and arrested. Part of protests nationwide, the 11th hour just getting started on a Thursday evening. As we talked about earlier, conservative House Republicans ramped up their attacks on Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein today, and in a big public way. During this House Judiciary Committee hearing, Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, accused Rosenstein of hiding information on Robert Mueller's Russia investigation.
Now, Mr. Jordan, I am the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. Okay? I'm not the person doing the redacting. I'm responsible for responding to your concerns as I have. I have a team with me, sir. It's just a fraction of the team that's doing this work, and whenever you brought issues to my attention, I have taken appropriate steps to remedy them. So your statement that I'm personally keeping information from you, trying to conceal information... You're the boss, Mr. Rosenstein. That's correct. And my job is to make sure that we respond to your concerns. We have, sir. Now, I've appointed Mr. Lausch, who is managing that production. And my understanding is it's actually going very well, sir. So I appreciate your concerns.
Again, I think the House of Representatives is going to say otherwise.
But your use of this to attack me personally...
Why did you... It's not wrong.
Well, it went on like that, and a short time later, Congressman Jordan asked Rosenstein about a report that he had somehow threatened staffers on the House Intelligence Committee.
Mr. Rosenstein, did you threaten staffers on the House Intelligence Committee? Media reports indicate you did.
Media reports are mistaken.
Sometimes, but this is what they said. Having the nation's #1 law enforcement officer threaten to subpoena your calls and emails is downright chilling. Did you threaten to subpoena their calls and emails?
No, sir, and there's no way to subpoena phone calls.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying. I'm reading what the press said. I'm reading what the press said.
I would suggest that you not rely on what the press says, sir.
Well, I didn't ask if there's no way to do it. I asked if you said it.
If I said what?
What I just read you.
No, I did not.
Well, now, who are we supposed to believe? Staff members who we've worked with, who've never misled us, or you guys, who we've caught hiding information from us, who tell a witness not to answer our questions? Who are we supposed to believe?
Thank you for making clear it's not personal, Mr. Jordan.
Well, I'm saying the Department of Justice.
Me because I'm telling the truth and I'm under oath.
The committee then took a break for a full vote in the House. Many Republicans have been waiting for. The House voted along party lines to approve a non-binding resolution that insists that the Justice Department hand over sensitive documents on the Russia investigation by July 6th. Here to talk about all of it, joining us from Tampa tonight, David Jolly, former Republican congressman from the state of Florida. Here in New York, Mara Gay, a member of the New York Times editorial board. Welcome to you both. Hey, Congressman, some people have gotten a sense that this is kind of a foot race. With the same end date, on or about the midterms, and on one track, you have the Trump administration trying to seat a Supreme Court justice, all the while kind of trashing and causing foment having to do with DOJ and the FBI. On the other track, you have this enormous investigation going on looking into the Trump administration.
And I think there's a great unknown among Republicans, and that's why you see the anxiety and the unease among folks like Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz and Ron DeSantis. They don't know when Rosenstein and when the Mueller investigation, frankly, is going to hit, because Mueller and Rosenstein are not playing politics. They're following the law. Brian, the contrast today was one between two men, in Rosenstein and Wray, committed to the truth, and committee members committed to a political narrative. And the most damning moment of all was actually that last soundbite you just played, where a member of Congress was questioning the #2 official at the Department of Justice who was sworn under oath, saying, should I believe you or should I believe political staffers who are telling me that there's this other narrative that undermines the Mueller investigation? There is pressure right now when it comes to Republicans looking at November. The great unknown is, what is the status of this investigation? And that's a matter of great respect for both Rosenstein, for Wray, as well as for Bob Mueller.
Mara, getting our attention today, as he often does, was one Steve Schmidt, who recently renounced his political party and left the ranks of Republicans. He said on Twitter today, Rod Rosenstein doesn't look like an action hero, but that is what he is. Guts, integrity, and courage. Americans don't get to see that from our high-ranking public officials these days, but today they did, and America is strengthened because of it. He went on. Jim Jordan is a clown, albeit a dangerous one. He is an heir to McCarthy, demagogic, dangerous, and faithless to his oath and America. He is unfit to serve in the Congress. It is hard to keep track of your players these days without a scorecard.
It's amazing. I mean, what Steve Schmidt said and what we saw today really does underscore that in many ways the crisis in this country right now is no longer simply political. It's moral. And I think, you really see that individuals matter. The people who are in certain roles matter. I mean, the drama we saw play out today in that hearing, this is all amongst Republicans.
Rosenstein would normally be a towering hero, career prosecutor, a career public servant.
But he's also a Republican.
Yeah.
And so is Chris Wray. And so I guess my point is here, this is not about partisanship. It's about what's right and wrong. And it's about upholding democratic traditions and those who are attacking them. And essentially, Jordan is a lapdog at this point for the Trump administration. And how embarrassing. And not just for his constituents or for him personally, but for the country. How sad and how embarrassing.
David Jolly, I mentioned LBJ earlier for a reason. You can go get his recorded phone calls in Austin, Texas, and hear him, as presidents do, giving marching orders to his lieutenants on the Hill. Have you any doubt that the GOP committee script in that hearing today came from Pennsylvania Avenue?
I don't doubt it, and I love that question, Brian, for this reason. There is a story yet to be uncovered, whether this is occurring or not, and I do believe it is, and it is LBJ-like. Are Jordan and others on the committee, and perhaps members of leadership, coordinating with the White House to ultimately create a moment where they either pass this resolution in the next 2 to 3 weeks condemning or finding in contempt Rod Rosenstein, or do they move to impeach him? And the only reason they would do that, we could say, hey, this is just the Republicans crazy in Congress doing this, but they actually would do it for the specific reason of giving the President of the United States ammo to actually have him fired. If Donald Trump can say that Rod Rosenstein has now been found in contempt of Congress, and therefore I am dismissing him, now he has the opportunity to control the Mueller investigation by appointing somebody under Donald Trump's control who takes a loyalty pledge, who ultimately dismisses the Mueller investigation. I am very suspicious that that's actually what we're seeing go on right now in Congress. This is one of the early chapters, but it's going to be a very quick book here in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
And Mara, you seem to think this has entered a kind of a new level of seriousness and worry right now.
I absolutely do. I mean, I think it's hard to remember that it was just, days ago that we weren't even sure whether the president could sign an executive order stopping separations at the border. Those families have still not been put together. We're looking at, the Supreme Court kind of dismissing the concerns that the president was motivated by racism, despite his own words, when they sent a ruling. I mean, honestly, all in all, this is no longer about political gridlock which was supposedly the story under Barack Obama. This is really about a moral crisis. And I think what we saw today was political theater. And I do worry, I agree, that it might set the stage for, the firing of Rod Rosenstein. And I hope that's not what we're seeing, but it's very discouraging.
We're much obliged to our two guests tonight, and to David Jolly, to Mara Gay. Our thanks for being part of our conversation. Coming up for us, with Trump and Putin due to sit down 18 days from now, Trump gave Putin's side of the argument publicly again today. President Trump is once again questioning Russia's interference in our presidential election. And to repeat, this is a matter that has been settled by our intelligence agencies, both in this country and abroad. But the very same morning the White House announced a sit-down with Russia's Vladimir Putin, Trump said, again, somewhat amazingly, Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with capital M meddling in our election. He went on to attack Comey and Hillary and ended with so many questions, so much corruption, talking there about his own country. Putin and Trump are to meet in Helsinki, Finland on July 16, just days after the president attends the NATO summit with America's closest allies. The timing is cause for concern among NATO members and foreign affairs experts. Former Secretary of State John Kerry shared his worries with our own chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell.
What are the risks of a one-on-one with Vladimir Putin?
Well,
or is it good for them
entirely,
to be talking?
It depends entirely on how prepared he is, on what his agenda is, on what he hopes to get out of it, whether he knows what he wants to get out of it, whether or not he can explain to people why it is that he praises Vladimir Putin while attacking our allies.
Their concerns may be heightened even more with comments like we heard from the president last night in Fargo, North Dakota.
Last year, with the European Union, and we love the European Union, we love the countries of the European Union, but the European Union, of course, was set up to take advantage of the United States, to attack our piggy bank. Sometimes our worst enemies are our so-called friends or allies, right?
With us to talk more about all of it, the aforementioned Andrea Mitchell, host of Andrea Mitchell Reports at noon Eastern each day on this very network. She's with us from Aspen tonight, where she hosted that conversation with Secretary Kerry. Rick Stengel's back with us as well, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, also former managing editor of Time magazine. Andrea, is the real concern here that the president will somehow pull a Canada and pull out of the NATO talks, maybe taking a swing at our allies on the way out, and then be seen with Vladimir Putin?
Exactly. The timing could not be worse. Excuse me, I've got some allergies out here. But the fact is that he behaved so badly toward our allies in Canada and tried to get Putin back into the G7. And he's going now into NATO, where he will beat up on those same allies, as he did about the EU the other day in North Dakota. And then he's going to be going directly to Moscow, where Putin is going to be celebrating his victory as the host of the soccer finals. So it's all playing out in Putin's favor. And we've seen already the way the president is prone to freelance, as he did in Singapore with Kim Jong-un, canceling those joint exercises, offering that without any prior notice to South Korea's President Moon, without telling General Mattis, as Courtney Kuby and Carol Lee, our colleagues, reported exclusively last week. That is the concern, that he will get one-on-one with Vladimir Putin, whom he has admired so relentlessly, as the tweet today indicated, and buy into Putin's narrative. And this just after dissing our closest allies. This is a real threat to the post-war alliance.
And Rick, if nothing else, it looks terrible. Take Andrea's point. The World Cup will have just come to an end. How could this not fit into a kind of victory lap narrative for Putin flying into Helsinki, especially given the PR help he received from our president this very morning?
Well, it's like a bad version of the Manchurian Candidate or something. I mean, the timing, though, could be worse, Brian.
How?
President Trump could meet with Putin before he meets with NATO.
Okay, so by 3 days we're dodging.
That would be an insult. But yes, even what he said about the EU, he is channeling Putin's view of the West. The EU was set up to repair the world after World War II, to put all the democracies together as a kind of counterforce to Russia. And Trump sees it as some kind of mechanics union that is meant to, diss the U.S. economy. That is exactly the way Vladimir Putin sees it. It's like he's channeling Putin all the time.
The destabilization of the EU, of course, as Rick points out, Andrea, longtime Putin goal. Here's the reporting from the Washington Post tonight. Listen to this. During a private meeting at the White House in late April, Trump was discussing trade with French President Emmanuel Macron. At one point, he asked Macron, "Why don't you leave the EU?" and said that if France exited the Union, Trump would offer it a bilateral trade deal with better terms than the EU as a whole gets from the U.S., according to two European officials. So there's some there, Andrea.
Well, first of all, describing the EU as trying to rob our piggy bank. They are our market. And he doesn't understand international markets. He doesn't understand that when he imposes tariffs, that is a tax on American farmers and producers. And he doesn't know that Macron was setting himself up as the leader of the EU to replace Merkel. That was the whole Macron policy as he came to the big state visit to the U.S. It just shows that he's not reading, he doesn't follow the briefings. And it's really disconcerting. We've come, ironically, from the most intellectualized academic president we've had in recent history, who was arguably too cautious about policies in Afghanistan and Syria, according to many foreign policy critics, to one who was too impulsive. And that is, in some ways, a virtue. Okay, meet with Kim Jong-un, better than going to war with Kim Jong-un. But too impulsive without understanding the facts.
Rick Stengel, what do you say to allies if you're what you used to be on the staff at the State Department? Let's say you're a career diplomat, you're part of the career staff there. Is there any back channel? Are the allies talking among themselves about their friend who took a turn in the United States? Is there anyone in the U.S. government saying to the allies, we're going to be good, it's still us, we're good, aren't we?
I hope so. Certainly the allies are talking to each other and saying, what the heck is going on here? I hope there are people at the State Department saying, this is a lot of drama and maybe the reality won't be exactly that. But remember, what's so strange about this and disconcerting and worrisome is that Putin's view of the world is that all of these international organizations, the EU, NATO, the World Bank, were set up by the West to neutralize Russia, to keep Russia in a box. And basically, Trump is parroting that same line of Putin's, like, well, why do we have the EU? Well, NATO doesn't do anything for us. People don't pay their dues. He is basically taking this line that Putin has been privately saying and publicly saying for 15 years, and the American president, the president of the United States, the bastion of these post-World War II institutions, is saying, well, why do we need them? What the heck?
Rick Stengel,
crazy,
here with us in New York. Andrea Mitchell in front of her very own large blue mountain out in Aspen. Thanks, friends, very much for joining us on tonight's broadcast.
Thank you.
Coming up for us, her last visit was overshadowed by a fashion choice she made. Today, the First Lady visited our... As we mentioned, First Lady Melania Trump was back at our southern border today, this time without the clothing controversy that marred her last trip. And this time she visited two different locations in Arizona. She did offer her support at migrant facilities in both Tucson and Phoenix.
I know how dangerous and difficult your daily jobs are, so I really appreciate all you do for, behalf of the country. I wanted to come here and see your facility and meet the children. And I want to thank all of you for what you do. And I'm here to support you and let me know what I can do to help you.
Meanwhile, the fight over her husband's family separation policy rages on. Demonstrations were held today in Arizona, Texas, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C. to condemn the Trump administration's so-called zero-tolerance policy. Inside the huge Hart Senate office building in Washington, almost 600 protesters were arrested. Some of them wrapped themselves in those silver runner's blankets that we've seen used for the children at the border. Those arrested included a Democratic member of the House from Washington State and the actress Susan Sarandon. The protests are continuing as the controversy has actually worsened. An HHS official today said the total number of migrant kids in custody is actually up from last week. That's despite a federal court order late Tuesday that requires migrant families be reunited within 14 to 30 days, depending on age. Well, with us from El Paso County, Texas tonight is our own Cal Perry. Cal, I'm told we're fighting a bit of a satellite delay, but my first question for you is this. Is the federal government any better equipped tonight than when you first got out there to, for example, reunite toddler A, who happens to be in a Michigan shelter, with family A, who may be in McAllen, Texas?
I think they're probably worse equipped because family A may not be in McAllen, Texas anymore. They may be back in Guatemala. The other thing is there's a paperwork issue sneaking up on everybody. The U.S. government loves its paperwork, and they love it in duplicate. And if you're born in a rural hospital in Guatemala and your mother presents that birth certificate here to officials while you're trying to get to your child in some kind of tent city, it's quite likely they're going to reject that paperwork. They're not going to accept that birth certificate. So I think the U.S. government is actually worse off than they were when this policy was implemented. They were vastly unprepared to handle the child separations. They were even more unprepared to handle the situation when we started moving around those tender-aged children. That's when we saw the creation of these tent cities and these beds and the discussion about perhaps moving folks on the military bases. So no, I don't think they're any better off than they were a week ago, Brian.
And Cal, what personal reporting do you have on the stories we've seen emerge that the zero, they've taken something off of the absolute zero tolerance policy at the border, that it's not being enforced as much or as effectively?
Right. So what we're seeing here is a continuation of the immigration system overwhelming the courts, really. When you go into these courts and you see people come in groups and you see them plead in groups and then you see them leave, you realize that the system wasn't great before, but it's worse now. And while they may not be separating families at the border, and we've heard really awful anecdotal stories about ICE agents basically doing duck, duck, goose down a line where they're pulling kids away from their parents and putting them in these tent facilities. And while that may not be happening anymore, we don't know what the federal government is doing when they're still separating these kids, when they say that the parent is a danger to the child, because they're doing it without showing us. They're moving these kids around at night. They're keeping them in facilities that we don't have access to. And when you start down that road, when you start putting kids in vans and sending them down a road at 3 in the morning, trying to hide them from the media, everything else becomes nefarious. So when you say to me that the number has actually risen, which we know that it has, I don't know if the government is making a good faith effort to try and stop separating families, or if they're just finding a loophole in the law that says if the parent is a danger to the child, they can still separate out the child, Brian.
We've sure appreciated your reporting from out there, Cal Perry. We really appreciate you joining us from El Paso County, Texas. Coming up for us, President Trump breaks ground in Wisconsin. That's one matter. The other matter was he dug himself into something of a rhetorical hole on one of his favorite topics, the presidential election we just had in 2016. That and more when we come back. President Trump visited the groundbreaking of a Foxconn manufacturing complex